I've conducted really the early part of my career on default. I got a lot of stuff, a lot of bonuses from working at the BBC, but I also hated it.
I don't recognise that account.
At the time, and probably arguably now, I always remember John Amiel, who went on to direct Southern Range and obviously went on to Hollywood and so on, and he'd done a director's course, and he was in a studio, and he was just a kind of wannabe director, and he'd run over time, and they at that time had like coffee machines, you know, they had trolleys that came round, and people were standing around, they were going, oh, he went over time, he went over time. And I thought, how mean are they, you know, and how brilliant is he, you know, that he challenged that. And the people I liked were the writers. I kind of recognized them. They came in, they were drunk and they were late and they were angry, and they were kind of like the people I'd been at art school with, and I thought, I want to be like them, and I'm going to have a go, and so I wrote to Coronation Street.
So I'm desperate to hear about Corrie, because that clip with Betty, the legendary Betty Driver, got such a huge laugh. So tell us about Corrie. So what year was Corrie?
Well, I'd done this whole thing of creating angels, but I was sort of rather actually admirably moral. There was a lot of insider trading, you call it, at the BBC then, so people who scripted stuff commissioned themselves, and also I just thought that was, I thought they were wankers, and also I was trying to get, I did a trade-off with the producer of Angels, that for every, I call them the old lags, who'd done previous shows, I get a new woman writer in. There weren't many, if any, and so on. So I was certainly not going to do that.
So did you think, well, if I can't find it, I'll just do it myself?
I left pregnant with my first child because I just could not stand it any longer, really, there.
Because of the male?
Because of the, it wasn't about the male thing, it was just giving respect to people who are heads of department.
Right. Not something you got better than.
It was just that I just didn't get it. I was not right for it. And I think because I've been a painter for a long time, I kind of missed the solitary thing of creating. I didn't actually know I could do that for very long. But I had this sort of thing about at the time, you've got to remember this time, and, you know, it was Theatre of the People, and Coronation Street was Theatre of the People and all that shit, I thought. And I kept writing to them and sending sample scripts, and eventually they said, well, come up and, you know, have a go, and so on. The problem was much more that there was only one woman doing it at the time, that I came from the South, not that I was a woman.
So tell us about when you were in that room with all those sort of legendary northern writers.
Well, it was,
male northern writers.
It was smoke-filled, very tough. And I always arrived a little late because I came from London and they all lived locally. And I remember it was split into two teams, people who were like under contract, who definitely get guaranteed, and then kind of the newer writers, of which I was one. And we were kind of both in competition, but they brought us in to refresh and all this stuff. And if you came up with an idea, you would kind of get it as a commission, but at the same time, everyone would end up writing it because it would just go on forever. And after the first morning, I didn't say anything, and I thought, I've got to say something. I've got to say something. I can't come all the way up here and not say anything. So kind of randomly, when Bill Podmore, who was the producer who looked like W.C. Fields, and he said, we need a story for Alf Roberts, who ran the corner shop. And I said, why don't we do a story about his roots? And the room went completely silent. Partly because I was middle class, and partly because the words roots. And he said, what do you mean roots? And I said, well, something in like his background. And he said, we don't do roots on Coronation Street, love. We just do forward thrust.
And you've lived by that rule ever since.
I kind of have, and also it was a fantastic experience. It was an apprenticeship, it was cold-face. You had to deliver the scripts when you said you would. You had to argue your case with other writers, and I would not be the writer I am without it.
So after Corrie, and you went back to Angels to write some episodes of it after Corrie, and then you did Z-Cars, amazing to see a clip of that, and Juliet Bravo. But it was Play for Today, really, wasn't it, where your sort of own authorship first started to come out. Can you tell us a bit about
Well, at that time, Cyril's department and plays department was separated, and plays were very elevated, and people like David Hare and Mike Leigh and people who did theatre and posh and so on. I wasn't. But Sudden Wrench, which I think was the first one I did, Sudden Wrench, there were all these like plays going out by theatre writers about women who wanted to do Open University, but they couldn't because their husband beat them and stuff, and which is completely fair enough. But I wanted to talk to the women in the supermarket, that you know, when I went round with my kids and stuff, and I wanted to talk to them. You know, I didn't want it to be people who already knew it. And I wanted to do a kind of Frank Capra. I wanted to do a humorous. I wanted feminism to stop. Not
so Sudden Wrench was the clip with the woman in the bath, wasn't it? Yeah,
and she took up plumbing.
Yeah.
And out of that, I did Driving Ambition, which was 9 hours on a Saturday night, which was an amazing thing at that time, to do 9 hours of two women taking up motor racing.
So can you tell us about John David, your play for today?
Well, John David was based on my first child, who's Down syndrome. And we were quite young, my husband and I, but that's not an excuse, but we...
So when was that?
He was born in 1976.
Which was around the time you started on Coronation Street?
Yes, yes. I was signed, I signed up for Coronation Street before, and then I had John David, and I wrote to them and said, or phone or whatever, and said, I won't be able to start immediately because a slightly tricky situation on this. And I remember Bill Podmore, he rang me and he said, the street, like the poor, will always be with you, Paula. So John David was Down syndrome as my first child, and we did not give permission for him to have a heart operation. We put him in care, and it was a very, very tough time. And then came the thing about having a heart operation. And when my twins were born, which was some years later, I was in intensive care. One of them had was a problem. He's fine, but he had a problem, and there was a full-term baby there. And I said, and he was brain dead. And I said, what happened? And they said, oh, he was found down a toilet in Waterloo Station or something. And I said, you're not going to let him go? And they said, we can't do that now. We can't, because there's just been a case where a doctor has let some Down syndrome kid go in Birmingham, and his life are after him. And I thought, well, I must write about it. I must put the other side, as it were, you know, which I did. But I decided to do it as a book first. I did it for Virago, because I wanted it to be a kind of handbook, as it were, and then I did the play afterwards.
And what was the reaction to something that was clearly both incredibly personal but also presumably very controversial?
It was very, there was, I think it was Michael Gray, but they called and said, Life have an issue with this, and many of them have read your book, 4,000 have read your book, and they want to do a discussion program afterwards to redress the balance. And I said, no, my play redresses the balance. And if 4,000 people have read that book, I'd be a lot richer than I am now. You know, they must have photocopied it. You know. And Michael Gray was fantastic. He stuck by it.
So did writing that piece change your writing? Did it make you reflect on your writing in a different way, going from very heavily fictionalised worlds into something that was
No, I don't
life?
think so. I don't think so. I think that obviously was very personal, and I think the turning point for me was Jacinda, really.
I was going to ask about that. So you talked about leaving school,
Yeah.
and you talked about not feeling like you fitted in.
Yeah.
When did you feel like you were clever? Because I think you've always talked about being quite an instinctive writer and therefore the people to watch. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would also think you were an incredibly smart, articulate, intelligent writer who tells great stories but comes up with big themes.
Yeah.
How do you view your own intelligence?
Kind of groping, really. Kind of like the blind man groping towards it and finding it. And just finding it was so fantastic. It's so amazing to find that you're intelligent through your work.
And when did you find that?
I guess gradually, as you progress through Coronation Street and Crown Court and so on, you start thinking, I think I'm I was very loath to commit to it because I committed to painting and given that up. So I was quite slow to commit to it and cautious. And then started thinking, I think I might be quite good at this. But then you think, well, how good? Are you going to be like some kind of sideshow, or, you know, how good are you? But I took a lot of being a painter with me. So, you know, I think, how can you tell this story? It was like a canvas to me, you know. Do you tell it abstract? Do you tell it figurative? Do you do the golden section, or do you throw that out the window and all this stuff, you know? So I took that kind of sensibility to it. But I think in researching, and I learned a lot from my sister, who ran a documentary company about research, so I understood from her, really, by proxy, how important it was. And in going and researching Dekinder, I went out to Nicaragua with a cultural delegation, and lots of really left-wing writers, God knows how I got smuggled in. And I remember sitting one night, I think in Honduras or somewhere, or in Manaus and Managua, and them talking about what would happen if you know, they came in and shot us, and people said, well, we dive under a table. And I thought, that's really interesting, you know, these people who are revolutionaries. And what if you were revolutionary and at the moment you wanted to do it, you ran? And that's what that title sequence of Dekinder is about. And then talking to Michael Waring about that, and going and meeting Daniel Cohn-Bendit and people in the Green Party, and being able to hold my end up, you know. To me, that was amazing, how I could actually say to Daniel Cohn-Bendit, that is not what you said at the time, you know. And I remember Michael Waring looking at me and thinking, oh my God, she's smart, rather than looking at my tits. You know.
Not that he ever did that. So then that confidence led you on to probably what is your most well-known and most seminal piece, which is, I keep wanting to talk Politician's Husband, but it's a politician's wife. Politician's Husband is the sort of sequel, but it's not, that we've just made for the BBC. Yeah. So tell us how you got the idea and the excitement of taking on the establishment, which must have been a thrill.
I think at the time, there were an awful lot of Cecil Parkinson.
So it was
David
a back
Mellor.
to basic sort of.
It was all
period,
that, and really it was.
Who was Prime Minister? John Major.
John Major, yeah. And it was the exactly, you know, the family values, but it was the picture at the family gate with David Mellor.
Yeah.
That was the one. And looking at the picture of the wives and the humiliation of it, and the public humiliation, and I thought, and I just remember thinking, looking at it on, you know, it was not even 24 hours news then, thinking, supposing she didn't.
Stand by him.
Supposing she didn't.
Yeah.
You know.
It's a brilliant starting point.
Yeah. And I think the most significant thing also was when I went in, and we went in with the producer, I think, who were here, to Channel 4. And Peter Ansouge, who was the commissioning editor at the time, and he said, who's her confidant? And, you know, I hadn't got that far. And I said, no one, the audience. No one should know what she's going to do. And so from that I learned a lot about storytelling, because you learn from your audience, you get very disappointed by them, there are many bumps in the road with them. But what was interesting about that piece was it didn't just catch on here. You know, it was big everywhere.